I slammed my coffee cup down on the table harder than I meant to. It was 5 in the morning, still dark outside, with only a faint gray light creeping through the kitchen window. I had a long day ahead building the new cabin extension before the weather turned. But then I heard it, a scratch, a soft thud, right outside my door. My heart jumped. Bears sometimes wandered this far down, but they never came to the porch. I stood completely still, listening to the quiet whine that followed. It wasn't a bear. I walked to the door slowly, every step making the old wooden floor creak under my weight. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open just a crack, enough to see outside. The cold mountain air slapped me awake. For a moment, I didn't see anything. Just the pine trees stretching into the dawn, the frosty grass, the empty rocking chair by the railing. Then I looked down. Right there, pressed against the doorframe, was a small creature. At first I thought it was a bobcat, but its fur was too thick, too silvery white. Its tail was longer than a bobcat's, with a black tip. Its paws were massive compared to its thin legs, and its ears twitched slightly, though its eyes stayed closed. Blood had soaked into the fur on its front left leg, matting it down to the skin. It tried to lift its head, but only managed to open its eyes halfway before letting it drop onto the wooden boards again. I froze. My throat went dry. Snow leopards didn't live here. They were animals of the high Himalayas, not Colorado. But what else could it be? I crouched down slowly, careful not to spook it, though it barely seemed aware of me. Its breathing was shallow, uneven, like it was holding on to life by a thread. I reached out my hand, stopping just inches from its nose. My fingers trembled. Part of me screamed to close the door, call someone, let them deal with it. But I couldn't. Its body shook with each tiny breath, and I saw its palm move towards me, barely dragging across the porch. That small gesture, that desperate reach, broke something open in my chest. "Hey there, buddy," I whispered, my voice cracking. You're okay. I scanned the trees around my cabin, half expecting to see its mother watching, ready to pounce if I touched her cub. But the forest was silent. No movement, no shadows, just that little life in front of me, waiting for help it probably never thought would come. I swallowed hard, feeling a sting in my eyes. I had to do something. Anything. I stood and ran back inside, grabbed a thick wool blanket from my bed, and returned to the porch. Its eyes flickered open again when I bent down. "It's okay," I said softly. "I'm just going to help you, okay?" I slipped my hands under its belly as gently as I could. It didn't even resist. Its body was light, much lighter than I expected, and limp in a way that scared me. I wrapped it in the blanket, feeling the sticky warmth of blood seep through the fabric and onto my fingers. Its head rested against my arm, too weak to lift. My chest felt tight as I carried it inside. I laid it down carefully by the fireplace on top of another folded blanket. It didn't make a sound. Its eyes were closed again, its breath shallow and ragged. For a moment, I just knelt there, staring at it, feeling the quiet crackle of the fire behind me. My mind raced. Was it really a snow leopard? How did it get here? Why was it alone? And most importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do next? Outside, the sun finally broke over the tree line, flooding the cabin with a harsh golden light. I looked at the little creature's side rising and falling, each breath a battle. My coffee sat cold on the table. My tools lay waiting on the porch. But I knew my day had just changed forever. Because right then, in that small, silent moment, there was no choice to make. Only one truth remained. This wasn't my plan for the day, but this was my responsibility now. The first thing I did was check the wound on its leg. I moved slow, careful not to cause more pain. The gash ran deep, just above its paw, caked with dirt and dried blood. I grabbed my old first aid kit from the kitchen cabinet, the same kit I used when I sliced my hand with a saw last winter. My hands shook as I poured warm water over the cut, trying to wash away the blood. It whimpered softly, its tail twitching under the blanket. "Easy, buddy," I whispered, feeling my throat tighten. That's when I saw it. Right above the wound, digging into the fur and skin, was a frayed green rope. My chest clenched. Someone tied this around its leg. It wasn't a snare trap. It was an actual rope, knotted tightly. My fingers fumbled to untie it, the fibers stiff and sticky with blood. When it finally came off, the fur underneath was raw and bruised purple. "Who did this to you, little guy?" I muttered under my breath. I wrapped gauze around its leg and secured it with medical tape. The entire time, It didn't resist. Its head rested on the blanket, eyes closed, ears flicking slightly every time I moved. When I finished, I sat back against the stone fireplace, staring at it, my heart pounding in my chest. Outside, the sun was fully up now, sending sharp beams of light through the window. My tool still lay untouched on the porch. The extension wouldn't build itself, but looking at this animal, I knew there was no way I could leave it alone here. I stood up and walked outside to the woodshed. Inside, I kept leftover wire fencing and wooden pallets from an old chicken coop I never finished. One by one, I hauled them back to the cabin, propping them against the side of the porch. The leopard cub watched me through half-open eyes as I worked, its chest rising and falling with quick, uneven breaths. By noon, I had built a makeshift pen in the corner of my living room. It wasn't pretty, just fencing screwed into wooden beams with a pallet floor, but it was better than nothing. I laid down blankets and an old dog bed I found in the storage room. When I lifted the cub into it, it whimpered again, curling its massive paws under its chest. I placed a bowl of water near its nose. Its eyes flickered open, cloudy and unfocused, but it didn't drink. "Come on, buddy," I whispered. "You gotta try." But it just lay there, shivering slightly despite the warmth of the fire. I sat down on the cold wooden floor next to the pen and buried my face in my hands. What was I thinking? This was a wild animal. A dangerous one, if it got strong enough. But right now, looking at its thin ribs moving with each shaky breath, all I saw was a baby. A baby fighting for its life. By evening, the wind picked up outside, rattling the porch railing. I fed it small pieces of raw venison I had in the freezer, placing them near its mouth. At first it didn't respond, but after a few minutes, its nose twitched. Slowly, it opened its mouth and licked the meat, then took a weak bite. Relief flooded through me, so strong it made my eyes burn. I fed it 3 tiny pieces before it turned its head away, exhausted. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the pen in the dim light of the oil lamp, listening to the wind howl through the pine trees. Every creak of the cabin made my skin prickle. Around midnight, I stepped onto the porch to clear my head. The forest was dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. I breathed in the cold air, rubbing my tired eyes. That's when I heard it. A deep, guttural growl echoed from somewhere in the trees. Not a bear, not a coyote. This was different, heavier, resonating through the ground beneath my feet. My heart raced as I strained to see into the blackness. The growl came again, closer this time. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. The cub inside whimpered loudly, as if answering. I backed into the cabin, locking the door behind me, my breath shallow and ragged. I turned to look at the little creature lying in its pen, its eyes wide open now, ears perked towards the window. It knew what was out there. And in that moment, so did I. The next morning, I woke up stiff from sleeping on the floor next to the pen. The cub was still alive, but barely. Its breaths were short and thin, and it hadn't moved from where I laid it down the night before. I forced myself to eat a few bites of oatmeal, then put on my boots and coat. I needed air, and I needed answers. Outside, the ground was damp with melted frost. The smell of pine sap and wet earth filled my lungs as I walked toward the tree line behind my cabin. Birds chirped overhead, blissfully unaware of the storm in my chest. I kept my eyes on the forest floor, scanning for tracks. Within minutes, I found them. Deep boot prints in the mud, leading away from my property and into the trees. I crouched down, pressing my hand into one of them. The print was almost twice as big as mine, heavy set, with deep edges that told me whoever it was carried a lot of weight, probably gear or weapons. I followed the tracks deeper into the woods. The sun rose higher, sending golden beams between the pine trunks. After about 15 minutes, I saw a clearing up ahead. As I approached, my stomach turned. There, strung between 2 trees, was a steel cable snare trap. The ground beneath it was churned up with claw marks and tufts of gray-white fur. Nearby, empty cans of beans and beef stew lay scattered, labels written in Russian. I picked one up, feeling its cold metal against my skin. Beneath the cans, partially buried under pine needles, lay a torn plastic sack. Inside were rotting pieces of raw meat, crawling with flies. My chest tightened with rage. They were baiting it. Baiting a baby. I looked around the clearing, trying to calm my breathing. There were more traps, a leg-hold trap hidden under leaves, another snare near the opposite tree line. Whoever these men were, They weren't just hunting. They were capturing. My pulse pounded in my ears as I headed back to the cabin, taking a wide arc to avoid leaving tracks on their path. I moved quickly, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. When I finally saw my porch again through the trees, my knees almost gave out with relief. Back inside, the cub hadn't moved. Its eyes were open now, staring blankly at the logs stacked by the fireplace. I knelt beside it, resting my hand lightly on its shoulder. "They're looking for you," I whispered. "And they're close." It blinked slowly, as if it understood. I sat there for a long moment, feeling the heat of the fire on my back and the cold fear creeping into my chest. What if they came here? What if they saw my truck, my tools, my life, and decided to take back what they thought was theirs? I stood up suddenly, my decision clear. I couldn't let them find it here. I grabbed my backpack from the bedroom and stuffed it with jerky, water, extra gauze, and my hunting knife. Then I took my old .308 rifle from above the fireplace and checked the chamber. 3 bullets. I loaded them and set the safety. I pulled my pickup truck around to the front door, its engine echoing through the quiet valley. The cub watched me through half-lidded eyes as I gently lifted it from the pen, wrapping it tight in the wool blanket. Its body was warmer today, but limp as ever, like holding a sack of bones. I laid it carefully on the passenger seat, propping its head on a folded towel so it could breathe easier. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at its spotted fur, the rise and fall of its chest. Its eyes fluttered open, meeting mine, and in that tiny moment, I felt a silent agreement pass between us. I closed the door and walked around to the driver's side, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My heart hammered against my ribs as I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I looked at the cub again, its eyes half closed in exhaustion. I took a deep breath. "We're getting you out of here, little one." As I pulled out onto the old logging road that snaked up into the mountains, I felt the cold morning sun on my face. My hands trembled on the wheel. In my rearview mirror, the cabin grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind the trees. Ahead, the forest waited. So did the men hunting in it. The road twisted up the mountain like a coiled snake. My old pickup groaned with each steep climb, the engine echoing through the silent forest. The cub lay curled in the passenger seat, wrapped tightly in the wool blanket. Every few minutes, I glanced over to see if it was still breathing. Each shallow rise and fall of its chest kept my foot pressing harder on the gas pedal. We had been driving for almost 30 minutes, leaving the logging road behind and taking an old mining trail that led toward the northern ridge. My plan was simple: get as far into the wilderness as possible, find a safe place away from humans, and let it go. I knew it might not survive out there alone, injured and weak. But staying near people was a death sentence either way. Halfway up the ridge, my radio crackled to life with static. I jumped in my seat, nearly swerving off the narrow dirt road. I hadn't used the CB radio in months, but now voices came through in muffled Russian. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was tense, urgent. My stomach twisted into a knot. I glanced in the rearview mirror. At first, all I saw was the winding trail of dust we left behind. Then, through the trees, I saw it. A black pickup truck, newer and bigger than mine, bouncing over the potholes as it closed in on us. "Damn it," I muttered under my breath. I pressed my foot down, feeling the engine strain against the steep incline. The cub shifted slightly, letting out a weak groan. I reached over and rested my hand on its side. "Hang in there, buddy." The road narrowed to a single lane, hugging the cliff edge. Rocks and branches clattered against the undercarriage as I swerved around fallen logs. My rearview mirror showed the black truck getting closer, its headlights flashing through the trees. They were trying to force me off the road. My heart slammed against my ribs. I gripped the wheel tighter, sweat dripping down my back despite the cold mountain air blasting through the open window. The truck behind us surged forward, ramming its bumper against mine. The impact jolted the cub off its towel bed. It let out a pained yelp that tore through my chest like a blade. I slammed the brakes, letting the truck behind me swerve sideways to avoid a collision. Gravel flew up in a cloud of dust as I jerked the wheel and accelerated again, tires skidding on the loose rocks. Ahead, the road split, left towards the river valley, right up towards the high pass. I took the right, praying they wouldn't follow. But in the mirror, I saw them regain control, spinning their wheels in the gravel before roaring after me. "Come on." "Come on," I whispered to the truck, urging it up the steep slope. The trees thinned as we climbed higher, the landscape opening into wide alpine meadows dotted with patches of melting snow. The sun broke through the clouds, glaring off the hood and blinding me for a second. I blinked away tears from the wind, trying to focus on the trail ahead. The cub whimpered again. I looked over and saw its eyes half open, glazed with pain and confusion. My chest clenched with guilt. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Behind us, the black truck lurched forward again, its engine roaring like a bear. It swerved to the side, trying to overtake me on the narrow path. I saw two figures inside, one holding something long and black out the window, a rifle. My blood turned to ice. Suddenly, the road dipped down into a wide curve. I slammed the brakes, wrenching the wheel hard to the left. The truck shot past us on the right, skidding sideways into the rocky embankment with a deafening crunch. Dust and rocks exploded into the air as their front bumper crumpled against the hillside. I didn't wait to see if they were okay. I slammed my foot on the gas, tires screaming as we tore up the final stretch towards the high pass. My chest burned with adrenaline, every nerve on fire. Finally, the road leveled out onto a narrow ridge with a panoramic view of the valleys below. I pulled over near a cluster of pine trees and killed the engine. The sudden silence roared in my ears. My hands shook so badly I could barely unbuckle my seatbelt. I turned to the cub. Its breathing was ragged, but its eyes were clearer now, blinking slowly as it took in the scent of pine and cold mountain wind. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, feeling tears slip down my cheeks. "We made it," I whispered. "For now." But deep down, I knew the danger wasn't over yet. I sat there for a few minutes, breathing in the thin mountain air, trying to steady my shaking hands. The cub's eyes were half open now, its head resting on the blanket, ears twitching at every distant bird call. The sun was starting to set behind the jagged peaks, casting long shadows across the ridge. We didn't have much daylight left. I stepped out of the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the clean scent of pine sap and melting snow. I walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. The cub blinked up at me, its breathing shallow but calm. I slipped my arms under its body, feeling how light it was despite its size, and lifted it out, cradling it close to my chest. We walked away from the truck, down a narrow deer path that led into a grove of twisted pine trees. Each step felt heavy, like I was walking through water. My heart pounded with fear and hope and something else I couldn't name. The cub shivered in my arms, its tail twitching weakly under the blanket. Finally, I reached a small clearing that opened up to the far side of the mountain. Below us, valleys stretched out into forever, streaked with purple shadows as the sun dipped lower. I set the cub down on the dry pine needles, kneeling beside it. "You're free now, little one," I whispered, stroking the soft fur behind its ears. "You're home." A rustle in the trees made me freeze. My head snapped up, scanning the shadows between the trunks. At first, I saw nothing. Then, out of the dimness, she appeared. She moved silently, her massive paws sinking into the moss without a sound. Her coat was pale gray, dappled with black rosettes that rippled over her shoulders as she walked. Her tail swung low behind her, thick and heavy. Her yellow eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, assessing. My breath caught in my chest. The mother snow leopard stopped a few feet away, her gaze shifting from me to the cub lying on the ground. She let out a low, throaty rumble that made every hair on my arms stand up. The cub lifted its head weakly at the sound, its eyes wide with recognition. For a moment, none of us moved. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying the cold bite of evening with it. The mother took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving mine. My whole body tensed. Part of me wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. I lowered my eyes, bowing my head slightly, trying to show I wasn't a threat. She moved closer, her huge head now only an arm's length from mine. I could see every whisker, every scar across her nose. Her breath puffed out in small clouds, smelling of meat and wild earth. She bent down and sniffed the cub, pressing her nose against its side. The cub let out a small, rasping chirp, its tail flicking weakly. She turned those yellow eyes back on me. For a split second, I thought she was going to kill me right there. But instead, she blinked slowly, once, then twice. It felt like a silent nod. With one powerful movement, She grabbed the cub by the loose skin on its neck and lifted it up effortlessly. The cub dangled from her jaws, its legs hanging limp, but its eyes stayed open, staring at me as she turned away. She walked back into the shadows of the pine grove, her tail curling around her hind legs with every step. The cub's gaze never left mine until the trees swallowed them both. I stayed there on my knees, staring at the empty clearing. My chest ached with relief and sorrow all at once. The sun had slipped behind the peaks now, turning the sky a deep indigo. Stars began to flicker overhead, silent witnesses to what had just happened. I didn't know if the cub would survive its injuries out there. I didn't know if the mother could protect it from the men who hunted them. I didn't know if those men were still alive after crashing into the mountain road below. All I knew was that for a brief moment, in that quiet clearing, I had done something that mattered. Something that made me feel small and human and alive all at once. I stood up, brushing pine needles from my jeans. The cold wind cut through my jacket, making me shiver. I turned and walked back towards the truck, each step feeling heavier than the last. Behind me, the forest was silent again, peaceful. But deep inside, I knew this story wasn't over. And maybe it never would be.